face of that. And so let me introduce briefly. I mean, this is not the first time you present research about the geography of the automotive industry. What is remarkable is that it's been always relatively stable despite all these political turns and twists in trade policies and I mean, the North automotive industry has gone through many shocks and transformations, the coming of Japanese, and then the impact of NAFTA and the impact of USMCA. But you show that basically the geography has its own pattern and its own path dependencies, and that is quite stubborn. I mean, it doesn't budge so easily. And that has always been a very interesting result of how much that matters. I mean, the clusters, the way in which things are organized, and that once you create a factory in a place, it doesn't move so easily, and production doesn't move so easily. But now we have electrification, and that we know that that might change things. So far, you've shown that was not going to be the case. So we're looking forward to this next episode and see what has been happening in terms of in particular the geography of powertrain production in North America. And also you've been working on Europe as well, which perhaps you can also spend some time and perhaps to just mention that similar pattern have been found for Europe as well. And of course, Trump 1 was not really a game changer. Then I guess somebody would ask you later on, and I would start by saying that right now. I mean, what's going to happen with Trump 2? I mean, is this going to have more impact than Trump 1 on these dynamics? So the floor is yours. I think you can share your screen without any problem. So you know the usual time, like 45 minutes, more or less, or slightly more since you're two. It is up to you. And then we will open the floors to questions.
Okay, thank you, Tommaso, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Jim and I presenting joint work to you in this Gerpisa seminar. Thank you, Tommaso, for inviting us to do this. As you said in your very kind introduction, it's putting several pieces together that all focus on the geography of the auto industry. The official disclaimer I have to mention, because I still work at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago for another couple of months, what we're about to tell you does not represent anybody else's opinion but ours, especially not necessarily the opinion of the Chicago Fed or anybody else in the Federal Reserve System. So, and I think, hold on, let's do a slideshow. What do we do here? View. From beginning. Okay, this is the full slides. I think this works, and I think you can hear me okay. All right, so the question we're asking is motivated by geography, as Tommaso said. We're focusing in our prepared remarks on North America, but we can extend in the discussion. We've done some work on Europe as well on the same question. So the question is this: electrification changes everything in the auto industry, what can we infer from possible changes onto the footprint of the industry? And today we're talking about this in two specific, rather simple questions. What does electrification mean? It means two things. We increase the production of all electric vehicles, not surprisingly, but the flip side is also true. The volumes of the traditional breadwinners of this industry, the ICE products, are shrinking. Either one of these factors by themselves could impact the geography of the industry conceptually. So we're presenting some evidence today about what we found when we were looking for that. In our presentation breaks up into three parts. I get to open and I get to close, and Jim gets to present in the middle. So I'll briefly tell you about the current footprint of light vehicle production in North America. And of course, we're focusing on the different propulsion types. We just call it vehicle type. Then Jim talks in the middle about one of the two questions: what happened in North America over the last 10 years or so as the volume of ICE vehicles has actually fallen? And then I'll come back at the end and look out into the future, looking with forecast data. What do we expect to happen in North America as the volume of all electric vehicles is expected to grow? All right, that's the outline. So without much further ado, let's just jump right in. First part's going to be brief. I do need to spend a minute talking about where our data are coming from. So we have worked for years with data from vendors that supply the industry with comprehensive and reliable data. Occasionally they merge and change their name. So S&P Global Mobility is the company we acquired this data from. It's production data for 2016 all the way through 2023. That's the last full year. The 2024 data are being filled in as we speak, so we don't quite have them yet. And these are detailed data. We know where every vehicle model is being produced in the United States, in Mexico and Canada, and we also know where all the engines are coming from for these vehicles. We know what kind of vehicle it is. Is it a hybrid? Is it a purely electric, or is it driven by gasoline or diesel only? And then in the last piece, we actually rely on forecast data and the forecast horizon when we pull the data extended out to the end of 2029. And we call that the medium term. All right, that's the data. And then let's talk briefly about the footprint. And we're focusing on two elements of the industry because they're easy to measure for us from this one data set. Assembly plants of light vehicles, and we use light vehicles a lot. So it's the term that's used in the United States. It refers to vehicles that consumers would buy. So that's passenger cars and what is called light trucks. So the light trucks includes pickup trucks, crossover vehicles, SUVs, anything that you would find in a car dealer showroom. It does not include light and medium duty, so the delivery vans and the larger trucks as well. Okay, what do we know about where assembly plants and engine plants are? Many of you have seen some of the maps I'm about to show you, but it's a good place to start when you talk about geography. The first slide is actually a table. So in 2023, just over 15.5 million light vehicles were produced in North America, and about 2/3 these are units are in the United States. And then within the US, the key region is what we refer to as Auto Alley. I'll show you the next slide. That picture speaks better than a table. So here you have the 15.5 million units. You've seen us present these maps before. We color in the locations. These are the assembly plants, and we scale the dots by the volume. And you see this heavy concentration in this north-south corridor, which we refer to as Auto Alley. Southwest Ontario has some noticeable production. And then from the state of Michigan all the way down to what I still call the Gulf of Mexico, there is the vast majority of light vehicle production in the United States. And then for the rest of North America, you have a noticeable cluster that's been built out quite a bit in the last 25 years in Mexico, centered around central Mexico, centered around Mexico City, where the center of demand for this country is located. But a lot of what's going on in Mexico, is being exported. Sorry, Jim.
That large dot in California is Tesla, our one outlier.
Yep, which is located in a former GM plant in Fremont, California. All right, so that's where things are at. That's our baseline. We can throw in the percentages. Mexico's got about a quarter, Canada's got about 10%, and then within the US, it's almost even between north and south for Auto Alley. It's about 2/3 of North America is in the United States. Yes, and the biggest outlier here is Tesla, and then there's a couple of plants in the Kansas-Missouri border as well, and Texas, of course, where Tesla is also building vehicles now. Okay, now we do need to talk, as silly as that sounds, we do need to talk about the nomenclature because there's a cacophony of voices in the industry labeling things slightly differently. Let's start on the left-hand side. ICE, that's pretty simple. So there's an internal combustion engine, and your fuel is either diesel or gasoline. That's what's been around for 100 years. That's been the dominant technology. And then we're moving towards what's on the very right-hand side of this chart. excuse me, purely electric vehicles, which we call BEVs, with industry standard battery electric vehicles, meaning the power to the vehicle is solely provided by an electric battery. There's nothing else. And then there's the piece in the middle. And both HEVs and PHEVs are often lumped together as hybrids. The HEV, the hybrid electric vehicle, does not have a plug. It does have a larger battery than the ICE vehicle, more than just a starter battery that can give you anywhere between 20 to 40 miles of range typically. And then when that battery is drained, an internal combustion engine kicks in and powers the vehicle. So two powertrains are included in that vehicle. Same holds true for the plug-in hybrid. There, the balance in terms of which propulsion carries what share of the load is shifted a bit further towards electric. And that is partly symbolized through the fact that a PHEV has a plug. That's what the P stands for. You can plug it into the charging station or into the outlet, just like a fully electric vehicle. But the battery is not large enough to propel the vehicle exclusively. So there is a smaller internal combustion engine in the vehicle. Now, why do I spend a few minutes on this? Because it's going to matter for what conclusions we infer about the geography of the industry. Because out of these four types, we can now group them differently depending on what the question of interest is, right? So at some point later, we're going to ask, where are engines being produced and how many engines are being produced in the industry? Well, an engine is required for the top, the three types from the left in, right? ICE, HEV, and PHEV, all three types will require an engine. So if your ICE volume shrinks and your hybrid volume grows, engine production is falling far less than the decline in ICE production. And by the same token, PHEVs and BEVs are commonly referred to as EVs, as electric vehicles. The standard HEVs, the hybrids without a plug, they typically get left out in that definition. So we will be very clear about what subset of these four types we're analyzing. That represents the universe of the industry. There's a small, very small, remaining small through the end of the decade element that is propelling vehicles, where vehicles are propelled by fuel cells, typically powered by hydrogen. That is at best an emerging technology at this point. We're not paying any attention to this just because the production volumes are so low that is at the moment it's a rounding error. Okay. All right. So where are these four different types being produced within North America, and what are they? So the vast majority is ICE, and then if you count all vehicles that require an engine, which is everything but BEV, in 2023 in North America, it was north of 90% of light vehicle production are represented vehicles with an engine. When you break out the geography of the biggest slice of the pie, ICE, there's Mexico is slightly overrepresented versus the overall. If you remember, there was about 25%, and the US is slightly underrepresented. Instead of 2/3, it's just over 61%. And on the flip side, when you ask where are the BEVs produced, or where were they produced within North America in 2023, hardly any were made in Canada, and almost all of them were made in the United States. Okay.
Again, that's the Tesla, what might be the short-term Tesla impact.
Yes, thank you. And we will be talking about the two different, we try to group the light vehicles in different buckets. So we typically in this map, we throw ICE and HEVs together. And if you imagine the dots were not colored in red and blue, but colored in black, that resembles, with the exception of Tesla not being there, obviously, that resembles the first map I've showed you. We're distinguishing here dots in blue. These are companies that are headquartered outside of North America, and the red ones are the companies that are headquartered inside of North America.
Well, Stellantis is part of we're still putting that in there as red.
Yes, correct. So technically, Stellantis is no longer headquartered here, but they have still a sizable arm. Correct. So that's the legacy, part of the industry. And at this point in time, and in this map making up north of 80% of production. And one other fact we want to point out as we round out sort of the baseline for this analysis, we know that not only is automobile production characterized by agglomeration of the plants that make the finished vehicles, they're very concentrated in space, and the same applies in the major production regions, including Europe as well. But there are other linkages within this industry, and this map points to another one that's important for our analysis, and that is the linkage between the geography of engine plants and the geography of vehicle assembly plants. So engine plants here are shown in black, and the vehicle assembly plants, we switched the color to blue. So there are two things that you might notice here. There are fewer black dots than there are blue dots, and that goes to an underlying principle. Economies of scale are vastly different between these two types of plants. A typical engine plant can make twice as many engines as a typical light vehicle assembly plant can make vehicles. So as a rule of thumb, you only need one engine plant for every two light vehicle assembly plants that you're running. And individually, the plants are larger, hence the black circles are larger on balance than the blue dots where vehicles are being produced. And it makes every reason to locate them relatively close to one another. Engines are pretty heavy, so you don't want to transport them far if you can help it. And you have fewer locations where you make engines than where you make vehicles, so you locate them sort of centrally, and that's exactly what falls out of this map. Okay, all right. What do we know in terms of data from 2023 about where plug-ins and battery electric vehicles are made? There aren't very many that were made in the US, just about 1 million units, just over 1 million units. And the biggest dot is Tesla in Fremont, California. But there are many other plants that made some electric cars or some plug-ins. You notice the circles are very small because these volumes, of course, are growing. But outside of California, the footprint of the industry in 2023 that makes battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids is very, very similar in terms of where the dots are, not the size, but where the dots are. That's very similar to the footprint of the traditional industry. Okay, and I believe that concludes the intro. So now there we have a baseline, and now we go to the first of our two questions. Jim's going to look back in time, and later when I come back, I'm going to look forward. So Jim, it's all you. I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, so it's my turn to start sharing.
Yep.
And so let's see. Share is there, and it's this one, and we go to here. A little bit slow there, and
You got it.
okay, yep. Okay, and I need to yep. When I switched over to Tommaso, Thomas, and I are taking up some valuable real estate on the screen here, so I needed to. Okay, so the second of our three parts is looking back at our recent what's been happening with the geography of the internal combustion engine vehicles and their engine productions. And so we'll be looking here at the again changes in vehicles and in engines. So while the percentage of vehicles of ICE vehicles has been declining, the market share between 2016 and 2023, we have this smaller decline in the assembly of vehicles that have engines in them, as Thomas has already pointed out. What is significant is the is the fact that we have the HEVs, particularly, and to some extent the PHEVs, still being produced with engines in them. And so this is we have seen a 3 million decline in vehicles with engines in North America. Most of that is the United States. Mexico has seen a slight increase. So that's but this is the decline in the production of engines. This was the assembly, okay? So we have a 19% decline in assembly. We have a 15% decline on the engine side. This is the production of engines in the three countries. And again, the most of the decline here is in the United States. Canada actually is producing more engines in 2023 than they did a decade earlier. How many times are you ever going to hear at Gerpisa numbers that show that Canada is increasing in anything? But here you go. Here is an example. So again, the reason, as we've already stated, is because of the HEVs and PHEVs. So this is the decline in North America strictly on the ICE vehicles. Here's this increase of 2 million, mostly HEVs and with some PHEVs in here. So the decline overall in vehicles with engines is not as great as the decline is over here for only ICE. And you can see that what we're getting here is that a decade ago, neither Canada nor Mexico, well, and there basically weren't any HEVs, virtually no. Well, I've been driving a Volt or an Opel Ampera since 2012, so I guess I'm part of that 100,000 that's in here overall. But this is an increase, and it's mostly the HEVs, not the PHEVs. But look at this. No change in the number of plants assembling vehicles with engines. So what we've just seen is a sharp decline in ICE production, a somewhat moderated but still significant decline in the assembly of vehicles with engines because of HEVs taking up some of the slack there. But look, no change basically in the number of plants assembling vehicles. So this is the assembly plant count. 63 assembly plants in North America. Well, 62 last year, assembling vehicles with engines in North America. You see, okay, well, there's a bit of this slight little moving down into Mexico, but not very dramatic, is it? And this is the engine plants in North America. Again, as Thomas pointed out before, it's always roughly, or historically, roughly a 2-to-1 ratio of twice as many assembly plants to engine plants. But even here, during this steep decline in engine production and ICE vehicles, basically no change in engine plants over the last decade. So what kind of story do we have here to tell you? Well, there have been changes. First of all, we've seen this. One of the reasons mitigating the decline here is the fact that we're seeing only half the number of engines crossing the oceans now compared to a decade ago. So therefore, we have this. You saw this. These four a few moments ago, and now when I add the imported engines, you see what's happening here. We have a sharp decline in the number of engines crossing the Atlantic or the Pacific. Okay, so we have this falling volume. We've seen it's been mitigated to some extent by an increase in 2 million units of HEVs. But what you've seen so far is not much is happening. Well, things are happening. So hang on here. Um, the S&P data allow us to disaggregate the various bits and pieces that are in engines. Most commonly, again, the number of cylinders, the displacement, and of course, we actually do use liters. Rest of the world, right? North America has done that at least. The shape, the valves, and whether the camshafts are overhead or whether the valve is overhead, and so forth. So this is the most popular last year. The most popular configuration was 4 cylinders, 2-liter inline engine, obviously not V shaped, 16 valves, a dual overhead camshaft. So you see, we've got these 5 elements that we can disaggregate in the S&P Global Insight data. So look at this. Here's displacement liters. In 10 years, we've seen this drop in the number of different displacement sizes, the number of different liter sizes that the engines are being manufactured in. But when we take all 5 of those factors, the number of valves, that sort of again combining these, you see the cylinders, displacement size, the config, and so forth. Look at this. We've gone from 60 down to 35 in 8 years, 7 years. What a decline, right? And this is, if you will, this is the dominant, the 24, a decade ago, 90% of all sourcing had 24 different engine models, and now last year was down to 17. But this middle, this is the drama here, right? Look at this. We've had this dramatic simplification in the variety of engines, this almost halving the number of different unique engine models in the last decade. So,
Jim,
yes,
sorry. I just want to keep that slide up because if you turn this in percentages, it's even more powerful. So you showed a minute ago that engines produced in North America fell over that time period by 15%. The first comparison of bars declines by 24%. Number of different displacement sizes. And if you go the drop between 60 and 35, if you measure all 5 engine characteristics jointly, the variety of engines over that same time period drops by 42%, even though engine volume, engine production drops only by 15%.
right.
Thank you.
So thanks. So we've had this decline in the volume of engines being produced. And the second thing we pointed out in this section is that there's basically been no change in the assembly plant or the engine plant counts, and not even anything significant shifting around among the 3 countries. But now, so what's going on here? This dramatic decline in the number of different models, engine models being produced. So we're seeing here, this is a change then. Engine plants are supplying fewer assembly plants. A decade ago, this is the number. This is the different assembly plants. So here's your engines, your 36, 35 now engine plants. 12 of these 35 engine plants are now shipping to only 1 assembly plant. A decade ago, of the 36 engine plants, only 6 were shipping to uniquely 1 assembly plant. You see, and back a decade ago, a third of them, here you see, right, 12 of the 36 engine plants, sorry, were shipping to, look, a whole lot of different assembly plants. That has become quite rare now, okay? And this is the other side. This is the assembly plants. Here, again, the 63, 62 assembly plants. A decade ago, assembly plants were getting engines from 2.3 on mean uh, engine plants, and now it's dropped down to 1.8. You can see now, again, of the 62 assembly plants, half of them are getting engines from only one engine plant, compared to a decade ago when only a quarter of the assembly plants were getting engines from only one engine plant. So, and again, you can see the numbers also halved at this higher end, where where assembly plants were getting engines from a whole lot of different engine plants. Okay, so again, assembly plants are getting engines from fewer engine plants. Engine plants are shipping to fewer assembly plants. This decline is holding true for both the Detroit companies, right? Our legacy companies, GM, Ford, and now Stellantis, the old Chrysler, uh, as well as the internationals who are here from Asia and Germany. Same thing, again, both directions here. The mean number of engine plants are shipping to fewer assembly plants. Engine plants ship to, on average, to 4 assembly plants a decade ago, now average of 3. Uh, our friends in Europe and Asia are aware that there has been just one or two little possible tweakings of policy coming out of Washington in the last couple of weeks. One of which is that there seems to be at least a modest amount of interest in what's crossing international borders. And what you can see here is a change over the last decade in the share of engines received from the same country as your assembly plant. Overall, this is including the overseas imports. Again, 2/3 of engines are coming from the same country as the assembly plant. If we exclude the transoceanic engines, again, we're at 70%. And look at Canada. Again, ooh, for the second time today, I get to say something is running more favorably for Canada in this day and age. There you go. Canada had virtually no engine shipping to assembly plants in the same Canadian engines to Canadian assembly, and now 1/4 of engines used in Canadian assembly plants are coming from Canadian engine plants. I think it's important before I move to the next slide to point out that what we're looking at is what's this very sharp trend over the last decade. This is not an emergency response to what's been going on in Washington with the new administration. This is something that the car companies had, and this is again applying to both the legacy domestic 3 here and to the internationals. They've been doing this for the last decade, not for the last 2 weeks since Trump took office. This is again doing it from the other direction. That is, the previous slide was from the perspective of what is coming into assembly plants. This slide is the perspective of what's going out from engine plants. And again, what you can see is a big change in this case in Mexico and in Canada. That is, engine plants in Mexico are a lot more likely now to be shipping to assembly plants in Mexico. Canadian engine plants now a lot more likely to be shipping to Canadian assembly plants. So this is the decline in the percentage that are crossing the international borders within North America. And here's the decline in the distance that engines are shipping. So this is median. Those of you who've been with us over the years, we use median in this case rather than mean in order to knock out the handful of very long distance possibilities in there. So you can see whatever it is that the median distance from engine to assembly now is 20% less than it was a decade ago. And again, keep in mind, again, all of this predates whatever is going on right now in Washington. And let me conclude with my share with an example. So Honda has had 4 clusters of production in North America now for a number of years. The engine and I forgot to have the legend on this piece. You'll see it in a moment. Anyway, the red circles are the assembly plants, and the blue triangles are the engine plants. So a decade ago, Honda was assembling vehicles in Alliston, Ontario, down in Lincoln, Alabama, in central Mexico. There's an engine plant next door, virtually next door to the assembly plant in Alliston. Similarly, down in Lincoln and down in Soleo, Mexico. In this cluster here, we have the 3 assembly plants quite close together: Marysville, Liberty, and Greensburg, and Anna, Ohio engines. By the way, that's where I am, which is of some relevance because we're very close to where Honda is building the battery plant with SK, which is just over to there. So this is the sourcing within North America. I eliminated a handful of their engines crossing the ocean. But look at this. Here's the Allison engine plant up here, the engine plant in Ontario. And do you see there is no line here? None of these engines were going from the Ontario engine plant, basically across the street to the Ontario assembly plant. And the engines into Ontario were coming from the United States. And also, look at this. We've got going all these different lines, some of which were quite substantial in width, crossing the borders, going this way and that. All right, here's 2023. 100% of Honda's engine production last year went to the nearby assembly plant. Every engine produced in Ontario went across the street to the assembly plant in Ontario. And similarly down here in Alabama and in Mexico, and the cluster of 3 assembly plants here in Western Ohio, Eastern Indiana. 100%. According to the S&P Global Insight data, the number of engines Honda produced that crossed a border was 0, nil, nothing. 100% went to the nearby assembly plant. We could have done this for other car makers. This one just shows up so cleanly. Other ones, there'll be a little bit of noise. This one shows you dramatically. So you see what's happened here. On the aggregate, yes, we have fewer vehicles with engines being assembled. We have fewer engines being produced. We've had no change in the number of assembly plants or the number of engine plants. But what's happened here, in one word, is simplification, dramatic simplification. And underlying the simplification of the geography you see in this map is this dramatic decline in the variety of the engines being produced by the different car makers. So we've seen this decline in the production of engines. We have seen a much more a larger decline in the configurations of the engines. We've seen fewer imports from overseas. We see fewer engines crossing borders within North America, and we see the shorter distances between engine plants and vehicle assembly. And now I get to throw it back to Thomas to talk about the future, which is why I'm glad he's doing it and not me. And so, Thomas, you're getting set there, and you are muted, and so I have to say that while Thomas is getting set up there, and while he starts sharing, that what we do, the S&P Global Insight data, as I'm sure many of you know, we've got these massive databases in Excel, hundreds of columns and thousands of rows, and we sorted it out. So one of the things we would certainly do is sort it into different worksheets based on which propulsion system it was. We put the BEVs in a different worksheet from the ICEs and so forth. And we've, of course, like most of us, have been focusing on what's happening with the battery side. And then we were looking over there in that worksheet. Oh, hey, you know what? It looks like there's something interesting going on that we missed altogether back there in the ice material. It's like, I mean, all of you are accomplished researchers. When you have that aha moment, and I can remember precisely, I was sitting in the Chicago Fed office with Thomas last August, I think it was, and all of a sudden, hey, wait a minute, we've got something really we hadn't noticed there on the worksheet that shows these leftover ice tables that we were not focusing on because we were focusing on the BEV side. So that's where this all came from. One of those aha moments that we love as researchers. So,
All right.
Thomas,
Can I make a quick comment, Jim? It's Luc. Just to make a 30-second comment. So I was working with Renault Nissan for 15 years. What we did is exactly what you said. We wanted to reduce the number of engines diversity because it's killing the business case. So you see it happening for all car makers. But the number one thing that we wanted to have is to reduce currency exchange exposure, because when we have one system produced in one place under one currency and the other one is in the other currency, there is currency effect which are significant, and the driver here is the financial analysts. So Carlos Ghosn was, when he came to Renault Nissan, he said, okay, Alliance needs to localize engines where in the same currency as the car is produced, because the predictability, the commitment that the car maker is doing in front of the financial analyst is disrupted by the currency effects. And this is the number one, this is the thing I mostly want to eliminate, because my commitment to the financial analyst must be super solid. And that's why, and that's the number one. It's not logistics, it's not the reduction, the acceleration of the symbiosis between engine plant and assembly plant. It's a currency effect vis-a-vis the commitments. And you see it perfectly.
Thank you. That's fascinating, because it makes it a more powerful force, because that applies in principle to all production setups, right? And doesn't just apply to ICE, then it also applies to battery sourcing and any other sourcing. Okay. All right. I think I unmuted myself, so I hope you can hear me. And we're back. You're back with me for the third part of the slides. So we had the baseline, and then Jim looked back in time to what happens with ICE, and I'm going to round out the presentation by looking forward. So this is the part where we draw on a forecast, because now it's too soon. If you look at data, 2023 data are not telling us enough about what the expectations are about where this industry is going. So the question we're asking in the third part is there anything we can learn about the emerging geography as electrification takes hold? Again, we're looking at North America only. So these are the three questions. We're looking at assembly plants, engine plants, and then the emerging battery and cell and pack plant geography. So the takeaway from this slide, we have two pie charts.
No, you're not. You're not sharing.
Oh, I'm not sharing. Hold on a second. Okay, I gotta go back there. Ah, there. Share. Where is it? There. Okay. Share. All right. This is better from current slide. All right. Now we're good, right? Okay.
You may want to go up one, go back one.
No, that's just the outline. Okay. All right. The takeaway from this slide is that the expectation is by the end of 2029, there will have been a massive change in the mix of what type of vehicles will be produced in North America. ICE, which dominated over 2/3, is supposed to be down to 1/3. The hybrids are supposed to make up essentially the other third, just a little bit less. And then pure battery electric vehicles are expected to represent just under 45%. Now, you may ask, okay, that's just one forecast, and you're absolutely right. These forecasts change month from month. That forecast is now over a year old. So if the S&P people were on the call, they would say, why are you showing these numbers for 2029? They've changed. Yes, they have. But bear with me for a few more minutes. In looking at the underlying detail of these forecasts, we found something rather interesting. And we would make the argument that there will be a massive change in production mix. What we find is not dependent on exactly what the mix of the colors is between the four propulsion types. Once I tell you how this plays out in the geography of the industry, I hope that will make sense. But regardless, I'm not willing to bet money on the specific values of the 2029 pie chart being realized. But regardless, there's a change underfoot, and every car maker has to struggle with this transition, and they have to sink money into path A versus path B in a way that assures that the company is a viable concern going forward. So that's where we start from. We start with this forecast. And if you look at the shrinking piece, Mexico increases its share of ICE vehicle production, and the growing piece, pure battery electric vehicles, Canada and Mexico also increased their share relative to 2023. Then the next question we ask is what's the story about light vehicle assembly plants? Where are these vehicles going to be produced in 2029? If China was the model that the industry in North America was following, there's a massive amount of new plants that are being constructed. And partly that's because you have new entrants to the industry and they tend to build their own plants. So what do we know about the emerging footprint? So here's what we do. We take industry output in 2023. That's the left-hand side map. I showed you this before early on in this presentation. And we take the same methodology and apply it to 2029. And there is essentially no change, okay? Auto Alley, the north-south region, southwestern Canada, and Mexico remain essentially as dominant as they are today. There are some small exceptions. There's more growth in Texas, California. That's not a change. It was important in 2023. It remains important in 2029. But that's the big surprise. You have an expected massive change in the production mix if you think about the four different propulsion types, and you essentially have stability on the production footprint where these vehicles are being produced. So something else is going on, and that's the next story. Okay, let's dig a little deeper about where these plants and what these plants are. Let's look at the identity of these plants. And so we're asking the question, which plants surviving between 23 and 29? And those are the plants that are colored in either in green or red. If they're in green, they grow their production volume. If they're in red, they're shrinking it. There's no clear pattern here. Then we ask, are there any plants that get shut down? There's actually only one, and that's, I believe, already closed. That's in central Mexico. If you look really closely, you can see an X there. That's a Mercedes-Nissan joint venture that went by the name of Compass. That is closed. And then the green circles that are hollow, there are 6 light vehicle assembly plants that are either currently under construction or already finished. They're opening between 2023 and 2029. There's 2 of them in the state of Georgia, the second Rivian plant, and Hyundai is building an electric vehicle plant there. VinFast is building a plant in North Carolina. In South Carolina, VW is building a plant where they want to make their electric vehicle, the Scout. In Mexico, Tesla, even though it's on delay, but by 2029, it's supposed to be operational. Tesla is building a plant in Mexico. And in an old GM plant in Lordstown, Ohio, Fisker still has plans to produce a vehicle. So that's how we get to number 6.
And Ford in Tennessee.
Sorry, Ford in Tennessee. That's how we get to 6. Yes, you checked my accounting. 6 out of 80 or so, that's a rounding error. Okay, so stability on the footprint. Okay, so how can you achieve with the same locations to produce this dramatically different production mix? Where is the variation? So then we looked at what type of vehicle gets made inside each of these vehicle assembly plants. And here's the answer to the puzzle. Many of us were expecting, just like in the olden days, light vehicle assembly plants were specialized in making only one propulsion system type vehicle because there was only one really, there was only ICE vehicles. Many of us had the implicit assumption, including Jim and I, that we were expecting to see going forward a similar specialization. ICE plants were expected to be replaced by plants making only BEVs. Not the case. There is a slight, so what this chart does here, it shows going across, it shows the number of different propulsion systems made at a specific assembly plant. And on the vertical axis, we count assembly plants. So the blue bars add up to the total number of assembly plants in 2023, and the orange bars add up to the number of total plants in North America in 2029. And what's the shift? The mass of this chart shifts over to column 3, and it goes away from column 1 and 2. That is to say, on balance, a typical light vehicle assembly plant now makes more varieties of propulsion systems in the same plant. There are 21 plants expected in 2029 to make 3 different types of propulsion system vehicles. Remember, we defined there to be only 4: ICE, HEV, plug-in hybrids, and BEV. So 21 out of the 80 or so are expected to produce vehicles that represent 3 different propulsion systems in the same plant. That's the answer. You can have, now you can square the circle, you can have a massive shift in production mix without changing your footprint of the industry. Okay, hardly any new plants are getting constructed, hardly any plants are getting closed. What's interesting as well, when you look at the first pair of bars, assembly plants that make only one type of propulsion system, there were 38 of them in 2023, and they're expected to be 33 in 2029. But the specialization flips upside down. There were 8 of those 38 plants in 23 that made exclusively BEVs, and 30 made exclusively ICE vehicles. In 2029, 23 of the 33 specialized assembly plants are expected to make BEVs only. 9 of them are expected to make ICE vehicles only, and then there's one lone plant by a Japanese headquartered producer that is expected to make HEVs only. Okay, so there is this flip of the specialization, but specialization is not the story. The story is avoidance of risk, protection against the nonlinear, uncertain transformation of the industry. My colleague Kristen Gicek has a beautiful chart that complements our accounting at the assembly plant level. She counts expected production volume based by vehicle platform, and she distinguishes platforms in these 4 powertrain categories, and she finds exactly the same thing. There's a move towards the middle. So for the manufacturer, that's a risk avoidance tool. It's not necessarily optimizing production costs of one particular propulsion system, but you're optimizing the risk of transitioning towards this new industry state where nobody knows exactly what it's going to look like at a specific year, at a specific point in time. And that is the answer to the riddle. Like I said, it also gives us sort of support mechanism for not having to rely on one specific forecast only. If I pulled the data today, I would get different answers for these pie charts that showed you exactly what the propulsion mix is breaking out to in 2029. But knowing what's behind this chart tells us the vehicle production geography in the medium term future for this industry is pretty invariant to the specific forecast about exactly what share of production in 2029 will be pure BEVs. Regardless, they're going to get there by using this approach to concentrate the production in assembly plants where you can make multiple vehicles of multiple propulsion types. All right, that's the key finding of the third part, and the rest of it I'll walk you through some maps and tables to sort of give you an interesting additional anecdotal detail. Now with 2029 data, you see that the part of the industry on the right that was pretty wimpy early on when I showed you that this comparison for 2023, now that gets more heft because the volume's now almost equally distributed between the 2 maps. Again, the footprint's not changing. We talked about this. If you look at what this looks like from a economies of scale argument from the perspective of an average assembly plant, right? In 2023, an average light vehicle assembly plant was producing about just over 200,000 units. Well, that same holds true in 2029, but the relative mix switches. The dominant propulsion technology in 2029, according to the S&P forecast that we're using, is expected to be pure electric vehicles. Economies of scale of the plants are not changing. The mix is changing. Let's go to the second piece. What about engines? Based on what Jim told you about what we found, looking backwards, when you look forward, we find the same thing. Yes, ICE engine production volume will shrink, but the hybrids are saving the engine plants in the medium term. Engine plants are not disappearing rapidly, not quite yet. Then since assembly plant geography remains essentially the same, then the linkages between engine and assembly is also unchanged. That follows from that. Yeah, we can look at this in a little more detail in a table form. That's not particularly interesting. I think at this point, I'm just going to flip through this. Vehicles are being produced sort of, instead of a map in a tabular form, and then we'll look at this as engine sourcing. It's quite similar. There's slight differences in terms of, Auto Alley North and the United States are where the legacy engine locations are. Those are going to persist going forward. I'm just going to say about that. And the final piece I want to touch is, what do we know, since we're talking about emerging electrification, what do we know about batteries production? And looking at the 2 pieces, the principal element of electric batteries are battery cells, and the finished piece that goes into the vehicle itself is the battery pack. There is, in no small part, due to subsidies from the Inflation Reduction Act funding over the last 4 years, there's a massive expansion of battery cell and pack production in North America, primarily within the United States. So this map just shows the location of the cell plants and the pack plants that are expected to be operational in 2029. And interestingly enough, the connection, the spatial connection between cell and pack production is very similar to the connection between ICE engine and ICE vehicle assembly. And Pack production locations are often integrated or next door to light vehicle assembly. So the footprint of cell and pack plants resembles the footprint of light vehicle assembly plants in 2029. And the 2029 footprint, expected footprint of light vehicle assembly plants is essentially unchanged from 2023, right? These are the numbers in terms of how many plants there are in each of the countries and the subregions. Again, this is based on the forecast. And we can look at this slightly differently. What's the sourcing picture, right? So again, from 23 to 2029, the volume of plug-in hybrids and BEVs produced in North America is expected to grow dramatically from just under 2 million to just under 8 million units. And the two big changes are that imports are dropping rapidly from 46 to 10%. And remember, while the table shows you percentages, this is against the background of a massively expanding volume, right? And then North America sourcing goes through the roof from 54 to 90%. And in terms of the actual realization, most of this takes place in the space of joint ventures between car makers and battery producers. Not surprisingly so, because battery production is at the moment not a core knowledge of OEMs. Okay, so
But just one thing, Thomas.
yeah,
It's very important to understand that the joint venture movement is to be interpreted in terms of capitalistic sharing and risk sharing. So battery maker, a battery plant, you invest between 7 to 10 billion, okay? And this represents a huge risk for the cell maker, right? And for the car maker, it's a huge benefit because the risk of this investment is not carried in the balance sheet.
Thank you.
So when you put it under the JV, then the risk is shared. So it's a huge. You need to be interpreting. It's not a matter of strategy, just to tie up with partner. It's a financial strategy.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a powerful argument. Yes, I didn't frame it that way, but I take your point. Yes, thank you.
Just Thomas, I just thought that Luke didn't introduce himself, but he's vice president for Northvolt in Canada for part of their, So Luke, I will let introduce later on. So just to tell you that he knows what he's speaking about.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I got you. Thank you. All right. So what I've left to do is just on the wrap up. We asked the question about the geography of the industry, and we said we have electrification growing and the ICE part of the industry is shrinking. What do we know? And so there were. We started with the current footprint. Auto Alley, this is a story that we've told many times. We find strong co-location between engine and vehicle assembly plants. And in 2023, fully electric vehicle production was just getting started in North America. When we look backwards, that's the part that Jim was presenting. We found a remarkable simplification of engine sourcing and the offerings of engines being offered as we interpret it as a cost-saving device of car makers as they deal with shrinking ICE volumes. And then when you look forward, we find surprisingly, in the context of radically changing production mix, we expect to find hardly any change in the footprint of light vehicle assembly plants in North America over the medium term. Again, that's through 2029. And the key fact that's driving that finding is that car makers are minimizing risk by focusing on a multiple propulsion platform strategy within their assembly plants on balance. That's how they can achieve that production mix in the existing footprint of facilities, and everything else then follows from there. That means engine plant locations aren't changing, and the relation between battery cell and battery pack plants is rather similar due to economies of scale and shipping logistics. So remarkably, the footprint of the industry in North America is expected to change hardly at all in the medium term future, despite the fact that everything else in the industry is changing. So that's all we had. I'm sure there may be some questions, so I'm going to stop sharing and we'll kick it back to Tommaso.
Well, thank you very much for this presentation. It's always fascinating how the economic geography can really catch structural trends and also graphically displaying and powerfully. It's very powerful in terms of making sense of complex trend and transformation. So that's very significant input. I definitely have questions, and some questions were already put forward by Luke. I think were interesting. So I just start. One is, I mean, Luke explained why OEMs wanted to reduce their vulnerability to fluctuation in currency, and so they wanted to concentrate high value added products like engines close to markets. But that doesn't explain why, in the case of Honda that showed before Jim, you shift in a relatively short period of time from a configuration in which it seems like two completely different logics. You know, I don't understand exactly what was the logic of 2016, where you have engine that were produced close to a factory going to different ones, and then engine moving around different locations for the same company. But definitely in 2023, you're close to what you would expect, that you have an engine factory close to you. So how do you explain this shift? And is the case of Honda representative of what has been happening also in other locations, or you don't have the data for that? So besides these currency things, what is the explanation for both the simplification and reconnection of engine supply and car factory?
I'll make a quick point on this one. So looking at what we did at Renault Nissan. So thank you, Tommaso, for introducing me. So indeed, I was with Northvolt for 7 years, but before that, I was with Renault Nissan for 15 years and working in Japan and Europe and USA. So the difficulty to a car maker is to match the market expectations with, of course, the vehicle offering. And the vehicle offering is not just a model, it's a model and a portfolio of powertrain, right? So in order to adjust, the best strategy is to offer a product to a market and also to optimize the economics of making standardized engine in one plant of a certain category and a larger engine or different engine to another plant that's specialized on this. It's a complex game of constantly readjusting, right? So, and sometimes you find yourself with a portfolio of engines produced in a portfolio of plants worldwide, and you start to mix the needs of the cars also that are linked not only to the market requirements, but also regulations, because the emission regulations play a role. And sometimes it's a very disadvantageous diversity that you find yourself in. So sometimes the sales guys are saying, okay, I want this car, make it happen. So disadvantageous mix. And sometimes the industrial guys win and say, okay, now let's rationalize our operations because the cost overall is bad. So sales, you're going to be reducing your diversity so that you're going to be pushing the cars, the fewer diversity into the market. What I see is that in 2016, diversity was super high, and then the car makers were all trying to rationalize the diversity.
Thank you. Yes, I think you, in a nutshell, you answered the question from Tommaso. In a world where there's ICE is everything, there's always the incentive to make an additional sale. It's driven from the consumer perspective. And the reason the Honda map in 2016 was rather complex is because they ended up shipping engines, across every border imaginable, because there was yet another specification that could maybe sell another few hundred vehicles, all within the same shell, the same body, all made on the same assembly line, just put a different engine in there. In 2023, Honda, I think, is the bookend case. We find a trend across all the manufacturers in terms of simplification, stripping out varieties of engines that lets them simplify their supply chain of engines, the way they source them. But Honda's case is simple because they don't have that many plants. And it's a bookend case. It's because it's clean. It doesn't get any cleaner than the way Jim presented it. 100% of engines are sourced locally. No engine within Honda North America in 2023 crossed any border, not even the US-Canada or the US-Mexico border at all. That's remarkably clean and remarkably simple. Not everybody can get there to that very endpoint, but they're all moving in the same direction.
Thank you for the replies. Are there any other questions?
One comment I would like to make also on your last Jim, on your last conclusion regarding the diversity of the assembly plants of the powertrain. So yes, car makers have to adapt to the market requirements that are going into from ICE to PHEV, BEV in an orderly fashion as much as possible. The market is unknown, ununderstood, so that they need to keep their options open, correct? But it creates a huge amount of inefficiency in the plant because instead of having one type of ICE engines, they have multiples, right? And consider this, that the different types of engine, ICE, PHEV, and HEV, go to maybe the same type of models, right? Who offer a certain variety of powertrain, but the color of the car changes. The color of the car changes, and the finish, the trim finish changes. So consider this: when a color of a BEV, a color of a car is associated to a BEV, okay? And when a car plant is producing, the order of the car is made by the plant, the paint shop, okay? So the paint shop, because it's so sensitive to quality, has to is commanding the sequence of cars once the paint of the car has been done. So sometimes the paint quality is such that there's variations, and then the car maker readjusts the sequence of cars that are finally defined just after paint shop. And as the car commands the sequence of cars that are effectively assembled in the assembly line thereafter, then all the order of engines, whether are ICE or BEV, it's resequenced. So when you have only ICE, it's easy because you can adjust easily. But when the paint is commanding an EV car, it's a nightmare to readjust. Just think of this flexibility that they want to keep in order to keep I would say market legitimacy. It's creating a nightmare for the plants.
Yeah. So the most visible character of an engine to people, that is to probably the minority of consumers who even know what liter size engine they have in their car is again the displacement size. Is it a 2 liter or 2.4 liter and so forth. And so one of the simplifications going on is why do you need to have a 2.0-liter engine and a 2.1 liter engine that's only producing a few thousand units a year?
But that's easy.
Right.
Right. It might not be obvious, but for a car salesman, it's super interesting to have a 2-tier or 3-tier segmentation. They start to sell you a car that's cheap, going into your budget, and say, okay, yeah, but if you do a little bit default, you have this car with a nicer engine, blah blah blah, nicer trim. It's a sales technique. You need to have a tier, several tier offering.
Yes, thank you. That's not. I was going to make a different point, which is that yes, you want a 2-liter engine and a 2.5-liter engine, but you don't need a 2 and a 2.1, for example. That's discriminating just a bit too much for the consumer. So why do that? But there's more in there. Remember, we were saying that based on the S&P data, we could distinguish 5 different types of characteristics of the engine. So, for example, in 2016, you had a significant number of engines that were configured with single overhead cam shafts. So you had dual overhead, single overhead, or the valve overhead. Well, there's virtually no single overhead anymore in there. So all of those, because why do single, less efficient, less attractive, and so on. So knocking out all of those single overhead cam configurations is one of the many reasons why we saw that nearly half, dropping in half the number of different configurations and so forth through. Again, the liter size is only the if you will, the most visible of these many configurations that are out there. So it's when we again in our tables you've got these rows of and the rows kept shrinking here from one year to the next because why make 3,000 2.1 single overhead camshaft, for example? That kind of thing. It's just get rid of all that noise, if you will. It didn't affect consumer perceptions. Very few consumers care whether it's a single overhead camshaft or a dual overhead camshaft.
Thanks, Jim. So if I may jump into something that Luchovan just said, I think that's an important point to bring out. I'd really appreciate you making that obvious to the audience. Just because we're finding that OEMs go to a modus operandi where they make multiple propulsion systems, produce vehicles of multiple propulsion systems in a single assembly plant, that is clearly incurring. That's a pretty ugly trade-off, right? Because you illustrated this very well in your example. And I think the one thing, I think that's an outcome of all this, that inventories are rising because there's more complexity now inside the vehicle assembly plants. None of this is costless. I think that just goes to show, and if they're doing it right, and it's on average, everybody's moving in that direction, that suggests that the cost that they're avoiding is bigger than the cost that they're incurring. Because if you build a fully purposed, exclusively dedicated plant to producing BEVs, and the volume is not there over the time period that you need to amortize that investment, that is not a costless situation either, right? So everybody, in the industry, many people understand that there are huge efficiencies to be gained from making battery electric vehicles on a dedicated battery electric vehicle platform. Just look at the pure players in the industry. Tesla has shown many things, but that's one of them that they have shown. So, but very few companies are doing that exclusively. And so yes, they're leaving money on the table, but it's part of the uncertainty, dealing with the uncertainty of how this transition is playing out. At some point, when equilibrium is reached, then that is probably going to change again, that mixed propulsion platform strategy.
Yeah, it's the analogy that I would propose here is that in our election last year, a lot of corporations gave precisely the same amount of money to the Trump campaign and the Harris campaign. Well, you could argue that half of that money was a waste because one of them lost and one of them won. And Mr. Musk may have won because he put all of his chips on one side instead of putting them 50-50. The other car makers pretty much, well, some exceptions, but pretty much put half their chips on Harris and half of them on on Trump, and so they lost half their money. But that's what's going on now with the propulsion systems. You've got to hedge your bets, because anyone who knows what the propulsion mix is going to be in 2030 is a fool. We don't know. None of us will know. So.
Oh, there are other questions in the chat, but I wanted to just add one thing about this specific debate, and then we shift to the other question. Is that we see in Europe that one of the reasons why European car manufacturers are struggling so much to make affordable battery electric vehicles is part of the story. Because if you make this decision, then it's very difficult to drive down to optimize your BVs. And also, you also make safe bet by making expensive BV with big autonomy, by sharing. So you go more on the safe side by sticking to expensive BVs, and that creates a problem, because it slows down the diffusion of the BVs, when actually if you make the bet of optimizing your BV strategies, you can drive down the cost of BVs to the point that you can make affordable BVs, increase the volume. So there is some degree of, I would say, performativity here. So if you stick to the strategy you describe, that is a safe bet, but also slows down the diffusion of BVs, because it prevents you from optimizing BV production and go down in price and create the volume. And then if you look at the NEV industry in China, they didn't have the choice, most of them, that they really had all of this technology. So they optimized to the point in which they create, basically, it's not true yet, but almost self-sustaining market without subsidies and so on, because they've driven down so much the cost beside all the subsidies they have received that reduce uncertainty, of course. I think this is also part of the story, and that also keeps a competitive advantage to pure players in this environment, because if the other ones are betting safe, that means that perhaps volume is low, but in terms of cost competitiveness and capacity of getting most of the share of the market, pure players will always have an advantage against these legacy producer that will try to bet that way. I'm not sure if that works 100%, but that's the feeling we get in Europe, where basically battery electric vehicles in Europe cost as much as in the United States, which is not absolutely the case for ICE cars, which are much cheaper in Europe than in the United States. And part of the story is this. That's the reason. So what do you think about? Yeah.
I think one could also bet that in 2030 the largest market share is going to be with HEVs. Toyota, which has been our market leader for a couple of generations now over here in North America. They had several years of sort of bad publicity for being the laggards on electrification, but they seem to be investing big time here now in HEVs, and that's is that hedging your bets, or is that saying that that's the logical way forward for somewhere between the medium and the long term for propulsion in North America, given the fact that the charging station infrastructure is going to be stressful for quite a long period of time into the future. So I don't know, Tommaso, is that hedging a bet, or is that saying a vehicle that's got a battery of a certain size and an engine of a certain size is actually the wisest strategy for the next 10 to 20 years? So
can I jump into this? So I think this is we're touching on some really interesting and important points here, right? So if you think about this so this is a global industry where companies that are active around the world, but then they have to optimize within regions for production reasons, and then within sub-regions, specific countries. Let's just leave it at that, for regulatory regions. There's compliance things of all kinds of in all kinds of dimensions. I'm not even going to talk about safety. I'm talking about regulations that apply in the space of shifting ICE down and electrification up. That's emissions and air quality and environmental regulations, call it that. So, but then you have companies competing in different systems in terms of industrial policy, for lack of a better term. there is a much different objective function in the Chinese market in terms of having assurance about which direction the government or the provincial policy goes in terms of supporting the switch out of ICE towards electrification compared to the major Western markets in Europe and North America. Yet companies have to optimize within countries and regions, and it is not clear. And so let me take a different step then. And if it's fine to have a portfolio as a company and you optimize within different markets, but then there are these, we have trade, we have markets that open up to other products. I mean, Tommaso stated very correctly that there's a huge challenge if you play risk avoidance in a nonlinear transition following the discipline of the market. It's very hard to actually effectively produce and profitably produce an affordable electric vehicle. All right. The only affordable electric vehicles we see being offered are coming out of China. But the total industrial policy context is different. So if you keep these markets in isolation, then that's one thing. But if you open the doors to trade, then that's another thing altogether. And I think that's where it gets particularly interesting in the entire discussion about tariffs and protectionism and what have you. But it's a complicated game that the individual, incumbents and the newcomers to this industry, the pure players in the electric space, are playing. And it's fascinating how dynamic this industry is at the moment and how little visibility we have. I think we have probably common understanding, but who's at risk and where the higher risks are in this global competition. But it's not clear how this is going to end, where this is what the landscape's going to look like 10, 15 years from now. I think that's very much an open question.
Right. Well, you don't need me to point out that almost everything is extremely polarized in our politics as well as in the other countries right now. One of the areas where I think one could assert that the political parties are of like mind is in principle, to be blunt about it, they're going to keep the Chinese out of here in any way, shape, or form they can. And I don't see the Democrats being different than the Republicans on that particular point. Whether they're successful or not is another matter. And I think there's some ways that we may be seeing BYD get in here, but as a matter of political policy, I see both. I see this one very narrow area of consensus in Washington. So I don't think we're going to get those low cost. I know some of my colleagues here will disagree, but I don't think we're going to get them in the foreseeable future in this country.
No, I was thinking more about Tesla because Tesla is in China and needs to
Right.
face compete. It needs to go down in terms if he wants to keep. I mean, if he don't wants to collapse like like something that went up very fast and then goes down as fast. It needs to put up new models out in the market, and these models needs to be cheaper and different from the others. And in European market as well, I mean, the competition might go that way.
Right.
We are in a turning point right now, but there might be there is pressure to push car makers to make this type of vehicles, and they have to make decisions in order to achieve affordable electric cars and figure out if they put themselves together, if they make common platforms. So there is a lot of things going on. I was more thinking not about Chinese, but competitors with Chinese that because they are in China or because they are in Europe might and of course Tesla in the United States as a player that might take advantage of these more conservative strategies that seems to have this problem. Anyway, there are a lot of the questions that were in the chat. Perhaps, I don't know if Christine wants to make them or we read them. And also there was Martin. I don't know if Martin doesn't want to wake up his kid. So I can read it or we can read it together or you can take the mic and ask directly as you like. Okay, so let's read it. I think there was a question by Martin about the different cycles of engine models by comparison with products. So that's true. I mean, an engine lasts several different generation of models. before it's changed, and so how these has played out in your story in terms of the changes. That was, I think, a question that is very
Yeah.
interesting. So.
That's an important point that is in the data. We didn't actually use it in here. It's standard. The S&P data do show us the start and projected end time of different engine model systems there. And yes, I think what happened then for our earlier time point is that we saw a lot of different engine models that had different start times, and as they were coming to their end, they were not being replaced, and so that's that would be one of the factor in this sharp reduction in the variety of models.
One comment on this one. The engine life is commanded by the engine block and all the associated systems to reduce emission, to make it more efficient. So electronics, oil pumps, water pumps, etc. So indeed, as you said, an engine life lasts 20 to 30 years. And it's regularly upgraded in order to meet its emission regulation. But think about this. Car makers have actually driven the emission standards in order to keep the competition out. So silently, I would say, silently developing and grades of updates of the engine that would be able to achieve an improved emission standard that is made public at the time when the Chinese cannot have the time to meet it. So this game has been a sort of a non-tariff standard strategy, and this is adjusted in relationship to the cars becoming heavier and heavier and heavier for several reasons, as you know. But this desynchronization between engines and car models is a very difficult organization, which is actually a barrier to entry. It's a barrier to entry. It's so difficult to make it happen that for the Chinese, it was very clear that when they saw about this, how Audi was doing it, and you know, like Wang Gang was in there, he understood. So he said, okay, forget about this this complex thing that they are able to do. We give up. We go electric in order to circumvent that difficulty.
So Kristen had organized the symposium at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago last week, and the Automotive News is reporting another way today, another way of based on the one of the reports at the symposium that Kristen had organized last week, that S&P Global Mobility are putting out numbers as to what percentage of probability we're going to have a short period of tariffs, middle amount of tariffs, or what they're calling a tariff winter, are being quoted today from her conference last week. So each car maker then is organizing what they're going to be doing here based on which of these three probabilities will occur then. So anyway, and so Kristen, your bits of your conference are in Automotive News today.
Yes, Lucian, appreciate very much again the industry detail. This is an important point, and Martin put his finger on this question. So in terms of the way we look at the data, we do not look at this data, the trend on an annual sequence. So there's always some noise in there, because when you cut a cross section of engine to light vehicle matches, you look at some programs that are running off and at some that just started. So acknowledge that. Thank you. What we do is we compare 2016 to 2023 data. So a lot of the annual noise is going to wash out. right? And what we find in terms of simplification is it holds up everywhere. It's pervasive across manufacture, across types of manufacture, despite all these what Duchovant called the synchronization challenges in the ice world, right? So I think we're pretty confident that we're abstracting from that, but we acknowledge, and maybe in the written version, we need to acknowledge that specifically, that there is this underlying complex relationship. So thank you.
There were a
Tommaso,
couple of questions.
yeah, Kristen just reached out. She's at the moment not able to ask her question, so if you want to read hers, that would be great.
Yeah, is there, well, I think you kind of reply to that. Is there a regulatory compliance reason too about this evolving geography that plays out? And I think you both answer that in terms of the fact that this safe strategy of mixing things allows you to comply with the minimum amount of BVs whenever you need. And if the market doesn't want BVs, you just make that what you need to comply. And I think that's I think your reply. Then she made a remark about the mixed platform fix in 2027. I don't know if you want to make any sense of this remark. And I think Martin answers that, say thank you for the clarification. And what did you find out about motor production in engine plants? That's the question of Christine.
Yeah. So let me start with that. So one question, Kristen refers to her version of drawing out the data that we do by the assembly plant when she looks at it at the platform level. And she finds a clear peak and a slow decline. It declines starting in 2027. I think that's consistent with what we have. I mean, we just run through, we don't look at the intervening years. We look from 23 out to 2029. So we weren't asking if there was a peak in there earlier, a couple of years earlier. I think her finding and our argument are qualitatively consistent. We're just looking at slightly different ways and find the same thing. The point is in the immediate future, risk avoidance in the North American and probably in the European context, but neither Kristen nor Jim and I looked at this data specifically for Europe, but I think we can infer that by, symmetry. In the intermediate future, producing multiple propulsion systems in the same assembly plant seems to be the least risky strategy. So there's consistency all around then in terms of what Kristen finds and what we find. And then her question about, do we look at all about engine plants producing motors? And I think the point is there, some engine plants are starting to hedge their bets about not just making internal combustion engines, but also making electric motors. So within the same plant, you can now support both the old and the new world of the industry. There's data out there. The short answer is we have not looked at that at all. We started with a specific question about the impact of the reduction in ICE volume, and so we only looked at ICE engine sourcing.
The regulatory, of course, we haven't mentioned, but I assume our friends around the world know that here in America we've got the divide between California and the Washington, the federal government. And during the Biden administration, the two sets of policies were running reasonably well in synchronization. During the first Trump administration, they sort of got around to thinking about California in his final months in office, and there was nowhere near enough time for them to try to do much about it. It is generally recognized that the new Trump administration will try to do everything it can to avoid the specific agreements and regulations that exist in California. And remember, that also is quite a number of other states in the West Coast and the East that add up to, depending on how you do the arithmetic, something like 40% of the market here is regulated by the fact that you have to at the moment, will have to comply with the ever more stringent requirements for zero emission vehicles. The way it's written at this point is that the HEVs do not qualify for the zero emissions in California. The PHEVs do. So this is one more example of hedging the bets even more. A PHEV could be thought of as the least efficient of any of these four propulsion systems, as it has to have a pretty strong battery and a pretty strong engine in there. However, if you want to maintain having a petrol-fired engine in a vehicle in California, depending on how the regulatory fight comes out, that would be the way, that would be the what might be called the loophole to continue to have your much beloved gasoline engine in a car is through the PHEVs. So even while at the moment those numbers are not that significant compared to the HEV boom that we have in this country. Again, this is further hedging it. It sure looks like Toyota is really making a lot of moves towards hedging its bets by being allowed to stay in California with PHEVs rather than pure BEVs. So that's the regulatory situation. Yeah,
it's a very, very, very important, very good comment you're making. Very interesting. How can you, it's 40% composed of all the states that follow the regulation that's driven by California. That's what you say, right?
Well, that's a rough headline. Inevitably, when you're talking about government regulations, it's 1,000 pages of detail to go through, but it's essentially the map of the states that vote for Harris as opposed to the states that vote for Trump. It's
wow.
So in the East, so for example, so what's happened in the states in the East, Maryland, which is where I was born and raised, or a small state like Vermont, what they say is that their state legislatures and their governors have long since signed acts that say, essentially, we do whatever California does. Whatever the California Air Resources Board, CARB, whatever they do, because Vermont, we're very environmentally sensitive here, but we don't have the resources to have a Vermont Air Resources Board doing all this research and decisions. So we simply sign on to what they've done. And so basically the Northeastern states, even New York, in short, again, the footnotes are extensive on this, but essentially California, Oregon, Washington, and the states from Maryland up to the Canadian border are following California's. At least that's the headline, if you will, without getting into the boring details.
Makes sense. And one other point regarding the hedging the bets regarding Toyota. So Toyota indeed is going to produce HEV batteries in USA. They also are ramping up a battery plant which is going to make full BEV. So full not PHEV battery, but full BEV battery from their subsidiary called Prime Planet. So they are indeed investing a lot in US to hedge their bets, even in PHEV versus BEV.
Yes. Yes, they announced a major investment into a plant in North Carolina this week. Yes.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add
great analysis. Yeah.
A vehicle to your category. In China, the range extender are becoming a thing. So which are basically BEV with small engine, just to guarantee that if you run out of energy, you're not stuck and you can use that. And that was important because I look in the European inquiry for the tariffs, which is actually a very interesting document. If you want to have a look at, is the 200 pages inquiry you can download from the European Commission site. And it's very detailed about all the subsidized and and the inquiry itself, all the trade measures and the different things. And they included the range extender because they felt that the Chinese might want to countervent the tariffs on BVs by exporting range extender. But you can add that to your category. I always thought that would have been a smart way of reducing range anxiety. So you don't make a PHV, which is from an environmental point of view, is not really what you want as an electric vehicle because it's very heavy, and whenever you use it with the ICE version, you actually emit more CO2 than in a standard vehicle because it's much heavier. But a range extender is a different story because it's not there for the purpose of really going fast, having the acceleration or the things that PHV are done for. It's just there just in case. And that can reduce range anxiety a lot, and it can be in place where you don't have a lot of density in terms of recharging station or whatever. It can solve a lot of problems. So you just move around at 60 kilometers per hour, something like that, and you get where you need to get, and then you recharge. And I always thought that this would have been a good technological transition, waiting for more dense or waiting for dense network or more efficient battery. I had another questions for you in terms of going forward. You look at the variety of powertrains, engine. Why not looking at the variety of batteries and how that is going to evolve? Because that might become a thing in the sense that in the same way you have an efficiency and cost linked to a variety of different type of engines and whatever, and then you want to simplify. It is very possible that we might see something similar with the battery across companies and range. I mean, you might see the two trends. You might see a trend toward more variety because of the different chemistry and certainty and what I do, and even if it's much more difficult for a battery makers to shift easily from one another. I mean, the cost of variety is huge. But at the same time, when you look at different battery makers, in terms of perhaps Luke can contribute to this, in terms of the shape of the battery, the technology, the standards. I mean, you might see more standardization going forward. It might be interesting to map that too in terms of future research.
Tommaso, thank you. That's definitely an area of interest. There's actually a compendium piece, if you will, where one could ask, is there something about engines that go into hybrids and do not go into straight up ICE cars, right? And so, yes, that's a possibility to get into that. We haven't done it yet. On your comment, I wasn't aware that that the European tariff discussion broke out range extenders and treated them separately. In our data, they're in there because they're in the plug-in hybrid category. Because the range extender does have a plug, but there's a difference between a serial and a parallel setup between the battery and the engine. So they're in there. We could presumably break them out separately, but at the moment there is no, I haven't heard anything about regulatory or political, economic trade policy discussions to require or to suggest that makes sense to do that, but it could be done.
At the symposium at the Detroit branch last week that Kristen had organized, we had some specific slides showing a rapid change in the percentage mix of the different chemistries in the in batteries in terms of LFP, NFC, and so forth. And so I think we have to distinguish short, medium, and long term. In the short term, in the birth of this electrification, there's only a few chemistries of importance. In the medium term, we may see a huge amount of variety going on. In the long term, there's probably going to be winners and losers. and some stabilization eventually. So to me, when we talk about the chemistries, we have to distinguish as to whether we're talking about the immediacy over the next decade or after we're all dead. So that's, I think, more so than other technologies, we have to distinguish which term we're talking about.
Just to finish on the range extender PHV debate, just that in terms of how you represent them, they're two different beasts, because in one you have a huge battery and a small engine. In the other one, the battery is big enough to be considered as a PHV, but the two things are pretty both very heavy, and they are, as you say, they're working together, while in the range extender not. In Europe, there will be an important change in the way PHV are accounted for the CAFE in 2025, because Europe has introduced in 2021 the on-board device things, and so there are devices in cars that now register how much fuel each car sold in the market consume, and real consumption, and car makers are obliged to transmit these data to the Commission, and Commission has started to collect this data. And based on this data, has found out that, well, the parameter that we're using to establish CO2 emission in the homologation test of PHV was completely wrong. So they displayed as between 40 and 50 grams of CO2 per kilometer, so pretty good, really contributing for brands like Mercedes or BMW to reducing their CO2 emissions and meet targets. And now they're correcting this parameter in 2025, so it will be more like 100 CO2 emission. So that they're increasing the parameters, so the emission of PHV will be accounted like 100 grams per kilometers and not 40. So like more than 100, even sometimes 200% more, and that will drastically reduce the contribution of PHVs to CO2 target starting from 2025 on, and should shift more the market towards BEVs, because and then there is another funny things that perhaps you're aware or not. I don't know if I already talked about that, but the slope. So you have a slope in United States for footprint, because you have a footprint-based CAFE. So the larger the footprint, the less is the CO2 target. In Europe, we have a mass-based slope, but for a funny reason, which is that in 2021, when they recalculate the slope based on real sales for 2025 and 2030, it turned out that actually, BEVs and PHVs are really heavy. So what happens is that the slope is not anymore positive, has become negative. So that means that from 2025 target and 2030 target, the slope is negative, which means that heavier vehicles will get more demand in CO2 target. And so that should push BEVs towards lighter. In general, it should put all the car makers to make lighter cars, because they gain both in CO2 emissions and in CO2 targets. But they should push away from PHVs, because PHVs are very heavy, and now they are not anymore good for CO2 target because of this change in parameters. So regulation can really play a crucial role in your mix, and so based on these, you have a strategic debate going on now in Europe about the future of the automotive industry behind the closed doors. The commissions at the top is meeting CEOs from car makers and suppliers, and meeting also for different organizations. But I don't think these two things I've just said will be changed. So going forward, the mix in Europe might change significantly because of this.
Tommaso, you were commenting on the standardization, and just a quick word on this. So my view on this one is that we would like to have, car makers and battery makers all would like to have a standardized as much as standardization as possible, because it's obviously a key factor for business model. But the fact of the matter is that the Chinese have leapfrogged ahead of car makers and battery makers in the West in order to disrupt them. So they are effectively disrupt. So car makers and battery makers are effectively disrupt. They don't have a clear view on how to address key characteristics of range, charging time, safety, and cost. And when we say standardization, it's a standardization across how the cell is manufactured, how the cell is integrated in the module or the pack, and how the vehicle architecture is integrated with this powertrain. So there is several factors which are there are lots of noise, and the dust is not settled, unfortunately, and a lot of hesitations. So very difficult to achieve this standardization unless the authorities, unless the policies and the authorities see an interest in regulating short term what should be the focus of the car makers, so that they protect employment and industrial efficiency. That's my view.
At the symposium that Kristen organized last week at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, there were several people there whose specialization is, even though they're Americans, tearing down the vehicles of the various car makers. And even though it is not legal to drive a BYD on the streets of America, they privately will have imported them into America in order to break them down privately and to see what is what's going on there. There's a lot of that going on here, and of course the Chinese are into Mexico, and while the Trump tariffs may seem rather counterproductive when it comes to Canada and Mexico, the backstory is that America is going to do everything it can to keep the Chinese out of America. As I said earlier, I believe it's both political parties are agreed on this one very specific point. And if tariffs on Mexico is the way to keep the Chinese out, then that's the price that Mexico is going to have to pay on this. But the Chinese have a major footprint now of entry into Mexico, and that's yes. Kristen is pointing out that. In fact, I've got another computer here off on my side here, and I've got the details, including the various PowerPoint presentations from the symposium that Kristen organized last week at the Detroit branch. So there's a lot of really deep digging data that's embedded in those presentations last week on some of the points we've been making here today.
Yeah, there is a message by Kristen, but I just wanted to say the same.
Yes.
That all the video, the recording and the PowerPoints are all available on the chicagofed.org site.
Yes, indeed, it's available for free for anyone who wants to take a look in there. There's a lot of click on the PowerPoints and see more data than you'll know what to do with right now. So,
well, thank you very much.
Right,
we're close to we're over the 2 hours. Thomas had to go because he had another commitment. Thank you very much. But we will thank you, Eugene, because you're still there.
Thanks.
We thank Thomas that just left.
Yep.
That was very, very interesting. I think we had a great exchange, great debate. Definitely, we're going to move forward with a lot of these research questions in Shanghai coming up in June. So I hope to see some of you there. And
well, good luck getting the Americans over there.
There's some coming.
That might not even be feasible.
I don't know. If we pay for them, they come. So
the borders may be closed between America and China by then. Seriously, it could be awkward. But anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Well,
And thank you.
let's
Yeah.
hope it will
Yeah.
still be possible. Anyway,
Sure.
thank you all
All right. Thank
for
you.
being with us, and see you all soon. Bye, all the best.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.